There is something you have been putting off. You know what it is. You have known for a while. And the longer you have known, the worse the feeling around it has gotten, until the task itself has become almost secondary to the weight of not having done it yet. You tell yourself you will start tomorrow. Or after this. Or when you feel more ready. And somewhere in the back of your mind you know that tomorrow will look exactly like today. So why? Why do intelligent, capable people consistently choose short-term relief over long-term benefit, even when they know exactly what they are doing and exactly what it is costing them? The answer is not what most people think. And once you understand what procrastination actually is at a neurological level, the way you think about it, and the way you approach it, changes completely. Let's start with what procrastination is not. It is not laziness. Lazy people do not care about the things they are not doing. Procrastinators care enormously. The task sits in the background of their attention, generating low-grade anxiety, coloring everything else with a film of guilt. Laziness is the absence of desire. Procrastination is desire blocked by something, a specific something that neuroscience has now identified with considerable precision. It is also not a time management problem. Decades of research have produced productivity systems, planners, scheduling apps, and time-blocking frameworks, all designed to solve procrastination by organizing time more efficiently. They work for some people some of the time. But for chronic procrastinators, they almost always fail eventually, because they are treating a symptom rather than the cause. Psychologist Fuschia Sirois at the University of Sheffield has spent years studying procrastination, and her research has led her to a definition that reframes everything. Procrastination, she argues, is fundamentally an emotion regulation problem, not a time management problem. When you procrastinate, you are not failing to manage your time. You are succeeding, very effectively, at managing your emotional state in the short term. The task you are avoiding produces a negative emotional response, anxiety, boredom, self-doubt, frustration, overwhelm. Procrastination removes that negative emotional response immediately. The relief is instant. The cost is deferred. And your brain is exquisitely good at choosing immediate relief over deferred cost. This is the neurological core of it. Your brain contains a structure called the amygdala, which processes emotional signals and triggers threat responses. And your brain contains a prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for planning, reasoning, and long-term thinking. When you think about starting a task you have been avoiding, the amygdala responds to the negative emotions associated with that task as if they were a genuine threat. Your heart rate may increase slightly. Your attention narrows. Your body begins preparing to escape the situation. And the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of you that knows perfectly well you should just start, gets overridden. Neuroscientist Tim Pychyl at Carleton University has studied procrastination for decades and describes it precisely as a failure of emotion regulation in which the emotional brain hijacks the planning brain. The crucial word is hijack. You are not choosing to procrastinate in any meaningful deliberate sense. The emotion-driven parts of your brain are responding to the task as if it were unpleasant enough to avoid, and that avoidance happens faster and more powerfully than the prefrontal cortex can counter it. This is why willpower-based approaches to procrastination so often fail. Willpower is a prefrontal cortex function. If the prefrontal cortex is being outgunned by the amygdala, giving yourself more willpower-based instructions is like sending more messages through a line that is already overwhelmed. The messages do not arrive effectively. What you need is not more willpower. What you need is to reduce the threat signal so the prefrontal cortex can do its job. And here is where the research gets genuinely useful. Researchers studying procrastination have identified a consistent pattern in what kinds of tasks get avoided. Tasks that are aversive, meaning tasks that produce negative emotions, get avoided. The specific flavor of aversiveness matters less than the fact of it. A task might be aversive because it is boring. Because it is difficult. Because it carries risk of failure or judgment. Because it lacks clear structure. Because it requires confronting something uncomfortable. The common factor is that thinking about starting it produces a negative emotional signal that your brain responds to as a threat. The implication of this is significant. If procrastination is primarily about aversiveness rather than difficulty or importance, then the way to address it is not to try harder but to reduce the aversiveness. Psychologist Timothy Pychyl has documented what he calls the procrastination task approach strategy, the pattern in which people who successfully work through procrastination do not typically power through their resistance. They reduce it. They make the task smaller. They reduce the stakes. They start with the least aversive part. They create structure where there was none. They do anything that makes the emotional response to thinking about starting less threatening. This is why the advice to just start something, just write one sentence, just open the document, actually works better than it sounds. It is not just a trick or a platitude. When you begin something, even in the most minimal way, you shift from the anticipation of a task to the experience of a task. And the experience is almost always less aversive than the anticipation. The anxiety that built up around not starting dissolves because the threat, the imagined terrible difficulty of beginning, has been revealed to be smaller than it appeared. The prefrontal cortex gets information it was not getting from the outside. This is manageable. There is another dimension to procrastination that is rarely discussed but is arguably the most important of all. Researcher Kristin Neff at the University of Texas at Austin has studied self-compassion and its relationship to procrastination, and her findings are counterintuitive. Most procrastinators respond to their own procrastination with self-criticism. They tell themselves they are lazy, weak, disorganized, pathetic. And this self-criticism, rather than motivating action, makes procrastination worse. It adds an additional layer of negative emotion to the situation. Now the task is aversive, and your feelings about not having done it yet are also aversive. The whole area becomes even more threatening to approach. Neff's research found that self-compassion, treating yourself with the kind of understanding and patience you would offer a friend in the same situation, is associated with significantly less procrastination than self-criticism. Not because self-compassion lowers standards or removes accountability, but because it removes the additional emotional charge that self-criticism adds. When you are not fighting through guilt and shame as well as the original task, the task becomes more approachable. There is also a temporal dimension that matters enormously. Psychologist Piers Steel at the University of Calgary developed what he calls the procrastination equation, a mathematical model that predicts how likely someone is to procrastinate on a given task. The factors in his model include the expectancy of success, how likely you believe you are to complete the task successfully, the value of the task, how much you actually care about the outcome, and crucially, two factors that work against action, the delay of the reward, how far in the future the benefit of completing the task is, and the sensitivity to delay, which varies significantly between people. The reason this matters is that it predicts something important. A task with distant rewards, high uncertainty, and ambiguous structure will almost always produce procrastination, even in people who are generally productive, because the neurological math simply does not favor action. Understanding this can change how you set up tasks. Bringing the reward closer, by creating intermediate milestones. Increasing your expectancy of success, by starting small. Reducing the ambiguity, by clarifying exactly what the first step is. These are not tricks. They are direct interventions on the variables that determine whether your brain will approach or avoid. Procrastination is not a character flaw. It is not evidence of weakness or inadequacy. It is the entirely predictable output of a brain that evolved to prioritize immediate emotional comfort over abstract future benefit, running in an environment full of tasks that carry ambiguous rewards, uncertain outcomes, and significant psychological risk. The question is not why you procrastinate. The question is how you can restructure the environment and the task to give the prefrontal cortex a fighting chance. There is something you have been putting off. You know what it is. And now you know something more about what is actually happening when you avoid it. It is not laziness. It is not weakness. It is a very old system, doing what it was built to do, in a world it was not built for. Which means the solution is not to fight the system. It is to work with it.